So we can just keep hanging out and chatting for a little bit because it usually takes people a few minutes to filter in anyway. Um, I went ahead and dropped the message in the Discord chat to let everybody know that it was going on. Going on. So how's everybody's days going?
My day was long. Uh, my brain feels very tired from lots of spreadsheets and data. So I'm gonna do my best to be here mentally, but you might have to cut me a break.
I think that's fair. I think we can't expect everybody to show up to every book club with like the highest level of energy and enthusiasm they've ever had in their life. Like we're gonna have long days sometimes. It happens.
Well, I finished the book up this morning, um, sort of like on my early lunch break. So, other than that, pretty chill day.
I literally finished up book club the Ninefox Gambit yesterday morning. Or no, actually yesterday afternoon because it was on my lunch break. Hi, Marion. Marion says that she didn't quite finish the book, but she read the beginning chunk and the end chunk and skimmed and skipped in between.
Ooh, interesting strategy.
Yeah, I'm very curious what your takeaway from that is.
It's
Ooh, yes, please tell us the plot.
it's gonna be interesting.
I am kind of envious of you guys that finished it like really recently. I think I read it like 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago. So um, I've had the bonus is I've had some time to process, but the negative is there's a lot of terminology that might have drifted away.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
the kind of terminology that you had to like clutch tightly to your chest the whole time you were reading to be like, okay, this book felt like a lot of work. Like I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it the way that I normally enjoy a book. I enjoyed it like it was a project that I had to understand or something.
I
It was an
thought
enjoyable project, but it wasn't recreational reading by any stretch.
There
Yeah,
is.
I also didn't. I finished it about a month ago, and then I finished up the rest of the series yesterday. So if there's any like details of events and stuff that happened, I'm not going to exactly remember.
I think it's interesting, like you speaking about it being work because it is like one of the more challenging books I've read recently, and like you could not get a sharper contrast between like the Six of Crows and this book. Like they're just like totally opposite. Yeah, I kind of like feel like we're gonna give people some whiplash with like themes, like genre, age range, like difficulty, totally different.
Yeah, I feel the whiplash. I feel it in my soul. It was great. It was fun, like a roller coaster, but ow, my spine.
Yeah, it felt quite a bit like reading or watching a board game for rules you don't completely understand. But then like halfway through you're like, okay, I kind of get the rules and like the strategy and the stake here. Um, and what the setup is and what their little manipulations are doing.
Yeah,
That's
it's
a wonderful analogy because I feel like I never really understand how to play a board game until the end, until I've like played it. And that's kind of how I felt about the book. It's like once it got to like the last third, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I see what they're doing. Like the imagery is like working for me. But like the first half, I was like, What's going on?
Well, it's so dense in the first half. There's so much terminology that you have no frame of reference for. Marion commented that she had just learned that there were two short stories that were intros to the book, and so she was thinking maybe that was supposed to provide more context. But let's be real. You can't be expected to study the syllabus before going into reading a book. That's not fair.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I went back and I read the first couple of chapters to kind of get a refresher of what happened about an hour ago. And there's terminology that they introduce in there that they don't ever use again, because she's never back on the ground as like infantry. The rest of the book is like up in the sky, doing commander stuff. So I don't know. Like, I was reading it, I was like, I still don't know what these things they're talking about are. Like, sparrows, Sparrow 1, Sparrow 2, those never get introduced again.
I felt like I was almost wanting like a glossary or like some kind of guide.
What I ended up doing, I had this little as my bookmark, and I have the 6 factions, and like anytime they said something interesting about like what that faction did, I was like, okay, military, okay, bureaucracy, culture, math, question mark.
Oh, yeah. Please don't ask me what the factions do. I still don't give you an answer for that.
That's the most Sharon thing I've ever seen. So organized.
Well,
I feel attacked.
The thing I found really interesting about like the different factions is that you kind of can't tell, at least in the first book, whether they are like individual species or if they're just like specializations or if it's like a classification system. Like the Shuos are obviously right.
Yeah.
Like the Shuos are obviously very good at spy stuff and subterfuge and very like intelligence-based individuals, but they're not necessarily the best at mathematics, which seems to be more of the Nirai's thing. But is that like, are the Nirai a like species of creature that is really, really good at math because of how their society developed? Or are the Nirai just a group of people that like, you are a Nirai because you're really good at math?
I interpreted it almost like a sorting hat situation where they take like elaborate placement tests and get basically sorted into like work roles based on those, because they kept saying again the comparisons, I'm sorry, but like with how are we going to say the main character's name? Cheris?
I thought
Cheris is
all right, I'll go with Cheris. Like she, like they kept saying like, oh, you went into Kel even though you were really good at math and you could have done this other thing, which made me think like it's some kind of like placement test type situation. And then also there's an element of choice. Yeah.
So the way I got it was, I think they are like a group of people, but you have to apply to get into the academy. And each one has an academy that you have to go to work in this like specialized group of people who hold like a function in the society. So you have to like place into the Nirai Academy or the Shuos Academy.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't think that's explained. I don't think it's explained in the first one, which is unfortunate because it does feel like very important to understand.
And there are like references to civilians, and I was sort of like wondering, are the civilians also just civilians who are within one of these factions, or are they all outside of the sort of faction system? And so you have like a whole bunch of people, and then they would have to sort of test into one of the academies or like show a great aptitude in order to be trained in one of them. But yeah, sort of a skills-based sorting hat situation was my read of how they got their determination.
I think the reason I struggle with that concept as much as I do is because Jadao?
Yeah.
Jadao? I'll go with Jadao. Jadao is a Shuos,
Jadao.
even though he becomes a general. Which, if the Shuos are supposed to be the, like, cloak and dagger kind of branch of the military, how do you make a cloak and dagger general? What?
So Jadal was a Shuos, and then he like changed his major basically. Like these factions are basically like saying like, "Oh, I went to William and Mary to be an English major." So Jadal was a assassin major, and then he switched halfway through to become a military major.
Well, they do say in the first book that he finishes his assassin major and does he works in the career field of an assassin for a few years, I think, before he becomes a like major military person.
Yeah, it goes back to grad school, decides to change. Like, get some more education, yeah.
I guess that makes sense. Like they're almost like not necessarily like branches of the military, but almost like military organizations, I guess.
Yeah.
Like if you were to talk about like the Marines, how Marines can do lots of things, but they, as groups, have individual specialties, like that sort of thing. It is kind of interesting to, after the two books we've already read, have something that is so, like, militaristic. Because it's such a different, like, structure of literature.
And all of the factions really seem to have some sort of, like, enforcement protocol. Like, I mean, even the nerdier ones, like, their jobs specifically were to work with the Kel or the Shuos to provide the backup for some sort of like enforcing group, like the Kel is the military or the Shuos is sort of like the CIA or the FBI or something. And the Vidona, who at first I had like a really hard time figuring out what they did, but then like they called them re-educators at one point, and I was like, oh no, I don't know if I want to know what they do. And so then then it was like, oh yeah, and they torture people too. okay, re-educators.
Yeah, to me there were really strong military themes, but even more than that, I think like sort of colonialism and like the whole like imposing a centralized order from on high and like conquest and like the idea of like heresy and even like, well, I have a question on like the symbolism of calendar and calendrical, like whatever. But yeah, I got some strong like imperialism vibes. Definitely.
Yeah, especially when they talked a little bit about like both Cheris and Jedal's backgrounds and like the different ways that you could be sort of a minority in that world. Like if you were planet born, or if you were planet born within a minority of people who were planet born. That was interesting. It was just like little nuggets everywhere, like in there, just kind of scattered. But yeah, it goes with those colonialism sort of vibes.
Yeah.
there's been a bit of a flow in chat. Lost Limey was talking about how exposition would have been nice for following the story, and how movies don't expect you to have read the tie-in comic to understand the opening credits. Marion says that a glossary would have been great. Lost Limey says that regarding the Kel versus the Shuos versus the Nirai, it read like they were different schools of thought / military tracks based on the memory scene when the glass is eaten, which we should get into that scene because it's such a... I mean, not right now, but like, holy smokes, what a scene. Let's see. And then Glaucon was talking about how it's hard to remember some of the other factions for sure, like if they were not profiled, which I think the only... Well, let's think. We had Shuos, Kel. Those were the two that featured the most prominently. And then we had Nirai, which I would say are the next most prominent. We had the Vioge, right?
Vidona?
Vidona?
Vidona.
Oh, the Lioge were the seventh that got they got a little too rebellious. So I've got 4.
You're missing the Andrak? Andrak.
And Dan. Or wait.
They're like the courtesans, like social regulation people.
Your culture.
Yeah.
I forget the 6th one. It starts with an H. Their symbol is a
Rahal.
Rahal. That's it. Okay. Oh my gosh. And we spend so little time with the Andon and the Rahal that I don't even know what they do. I don't know what their role is in this like military branch society. And I realize that's probably because we're mostly seeing the groups that are the strictest on the society, because they're the ones that are like, we're going to war. Let's do this.
Or the enforcers on the society. I can see my post-it note so you can understand my understanding of what I did not understand.
Now wait, which did you say were the enforcers?
Well, there were a whole bunch of them that were like enforcers, but the ones that we see the most are like very visible enforcers. Of things like the Kel and the Tuos, and then like the Nirai as sort of their analysts. We don't see much of Andon and their culture. The Rahal designed the social order and like did the work like designing the doctrine and like sort of, so like mentally I was just like, oh, it's like the justice system, I guess. And it said at one point that they oversee the calendar function. So I just wrote all that down.
In my mind, I'm like probably totally biased because I'm a civil servant, so I'm like part of the bureaucracy. But I compared it a bit to like all of the different functions of like government, sort of. So you have like the military, you have the justice system, you have your intelligence service, you have your legislature, so like the people like making the rules, the people enforcing the rules, the military, the diplomats. So like that's kind of how I framed it in my mind.
Okay. Chat bumped in and was talking about imperialism, definitely. New places not just conquered but ideologically overwhelmed.
Ooh, that's really well put.
Yeah, because that's how their whole magic system works, right? Like if you don't have the calendar being obeyed where you're at, then all of a sudden you no longer have the ability to use formations to do things like protect your flanks.
Yeah.
And then Lost Limey says, and were the servitors exempt from the factions? And I don't think the servitors were exempt from the factions, but I think each faction had servitors in it. So it was like you would have like Rahal servitors and Shuos servitors and things like that. Because in fact, like early on when they're talking about Cheris being approached by subcommand to be like, oh, hey, we want you to think about how to solve this crazy problem. They sent her a fox, which she identified as a Shuos servitor, because Shuos used the nine-tailed fox as their like iconography. Glaucon points out that he doesn't think servitors get moved around, so when Cheris leaves one area, she has to get to know new ones, but the new ones would communicate with the old ones, which I thought was really interesting because you don't hear a lot about how they're doing that. Because comm systems on ships, obviously you want the ships to be able to communicate with each other, but it's how are the servitors, like, are they also connecting to the comm systems then? And sending their own signals subspace?
I think they communicate amongst each other on the ship in some way. I thought the servitors were really, really interesting. And that was like one of my favorite like vignettes in the book. And I was like so worried towards the end that they weren't gonna like, it was just gonna be world building and they weren't gonna actually have like a function in the plot. I didn't think about how they communicate. I guess I just assumed like internet. I don't know.
I don't think they can communicate with servitors that they don't know. Or that are really far away.
So the only reason I think Glaucon says that the new ones would communicate with the old ones is that all the servitors seemed to know who Cheris was, even when she was arriving in a completely new location for her. And so, unless those servitors are doing info dumps every time they meet with one of the ships that she's been on, which I guess is possible.
Yeah, I don't know, because now I'm thinking about that and like the fact that they can't communicate between like places they don't have strong connections to is like kind of important later on. So that is a good point. I'm not really sure that's ever one of those things that's like super clarified, which is unfortunate.
I'm willing to accept the possibility that they would just do info dumps every time Cheris changed vessel.
Yeah,
like,
I think so as well.
That seems fairly plausible, and it means that they can do short-range communication.
It was
especially
kind of that they gossip.
Yeah, because like especially if there's like someone who talks to them and they become friends with, like, oh, it's so interesting. I'm gonna tell like these other servitors about that on the ship next time we dock.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting part of Cheris's like character and characterization, that she took time to like I guess show kindness to these like beings that nobody even noticed. I thought it was a good like character building element.
So speaking of the servitors, how did you guys visualize them in your head when you were reading about them?
Ooh.
They don't describe until book 3, which like was completely different than what I had in my head the whole time.
I imagined insects. So like fairly small, like robotic insects. Because they mentioned once that there was like a wing that needed to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine like moths and like butterflies and like dragonflies and stuff.
Based on whatever it said, like the form was, like there were like snake forms and bird forms and stuff. So I kind of imagined like a small robotic version of an animal. The one that I could never figure out was like, what's a delta form? what does that one look like? The delta,
Yeah.
like a Greek letter. Maybe it's just like describing its shape, so it's not like shaped like an animal, but it's just a shape. I don't know, but small robot is what I was imagining.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Sharon.
A delicate robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was picturing when it's like, oh, it's a snake form. I'm like, okay, so it's like a robot hover snake. I guess with like it can pop out little arms when it needs to do arm stuff. Like I didn't have a great picture of what they would look like because it was always like, yeah, and then two snake forms and a bird form shuttled into the room and they did a couple of things and then they left. And I'm like, cool.
It's so interesting now that you're mentioning like snake forms and bird forms. I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I remember that. But in my mind, when you asked me that question, I was like, insects. I imagine them the whole time like insects. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, same. I had like a really hard time picturing them, especially like the snake forms, because apparently they're hovering constantly. So I'm trying to picture like a snake just kind of like hovering in the air all the time, and it's a little bit silly.
Well, there's one of the vignettes they have is when a snake form is being loaded into one of the propaganda canisters to be shot down to the station. And it talks a little bit about how even though it has no natural reason for it, how it kind of wonders what it would be like to burrow into the ground. And I was like, yeah, I guess you would have to be like, you'd have to wonder about those sorts of things, because if you're shaped like a snake, then you know that your like ideal shape is used for doing things like burrowing underground. But as a robot, you probably don't do that almost ever.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that little chunk where I liked all of the sections where they were doing stuff from the perspective of the servitors, but I very much liked the from the snake form's perspective section.
Yeah, I love AI as a perspective and a character, and so I was very charmed by the servitors.
I thought it was really interesting how the servitors almost seem to be creating their own sort of agenda, where you could almost see like the embers of revolution from an AI perspective, because they're like, yeah, they don't notice us and we can do basically whatever we want, and we keep information like how to blackmail all of them if we ever needed to, so that we can turn them against each other. And I'm like, oh man, we gotta be careful about AI, y'all.
They call them like child, or like the Kel child said this. You know, yeah, good.
Yeah.
Well, for that particular instance, I assumed that what it meant was that that particular Kel was probably on the younger end of Kel that they work with. And so it's like, oh, you're not a normal Kel, you are a child Kel.
I kind of read it with the implication that all of the humans that it was dealing with in that circumstance, it was just kind of very like mentally condescending towards them, in a you know, a parental kind of way of like, you'll learn more when you get older, but right now you're just little human brains, so sucks.
I'm gonna dip into chat again real quick. So let's see. Lost Limey, when we were talking earlier about the Rahal, Lost Limey suggested that he was pretty sure they were the propagandists, which I think is right. But that's also lining up with what you guys were talking about with like they established doctrine in the first place. And then the Vidona? Yeah? Was the Vidona the other group?
Yeah.
I never.
Fiona and Andan.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they were the ones who were more of the like encouraging others to join doctrine as opposed to establishing doctrine itself.
Encouraging them to join. A very nice way of putting what the Vidona do.
Yeah, well,
I saw them as like the sort of priestly figures of the society because it was their job to like perform remembrances and the holidays and declare heretics and who isn't a heretic and then deal with them, which all is torture. So they're basically like priest torturers.
yeah, I kind of pictured them as the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
Like an educational minded branch of the church, if you would. But the church is the whole system of government.
Right.
Dictated by the calendar.
Right, because the kind of religion equivalent is the calendar.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Lost Limey suggests that maybe the servitors communicated via what like the Warhammer 40k novels would consider binaric blasts, which is where you'd basically just send a bunch of info as a huge like wave, and you could shoot it almost like a cannon at other places in a region. And so you'd have just space stations that would be firing these huge info blasts at each other so that they could travel over subspace and things like that. Glacon points out that the new ones, the servitors, asked the old ones about Cheris, but it could have been an info dump. Like maybe there's intermittent communication. Lost Limey says based on the end, he assumes that servitors Cheris encounters in book 2 won't know about her. Which I'm actually curious what you mean by that, Lost Limey, so if you can expand on that a little bit. Glacon says he loved the servitors, they had more personality than most of the humans, and he guesses because the humans were, you see a lot of, are Kel and Information Instinct, which was pointed out earlier is basically just like super brainwashing. So that they can adhere to formations and things like that without any questions.
Yeah, like they literally get a physical response if they try to defy an order.
I thought that was really interesting and like more commentary on military, I think. The whole like the brainwashing scene from when she was learning formations and stuff was just really interesting. I enjoyed both her like Cheris's scenes from academy, I guess, or training, and then also Jadau's got his like recollections of training were really interesting. I felt like they both like informed who they were and like built out the world in ways that some of like the military conflicts like didn't for me. It was really cool.
Yeah. I think the scariest part, well, not there were several scary parts where they were discussing formation instinct that just had really creepy implications. But like that was a whole other aspect of it that I hadn't even gone into until the chapter where the two servitors are talking in that closet, and there are two Kel in there getting it on, and they're like, oh well, this one at least seems to be consensual, you know. It doesn't seem like it's a formation instinct thing where they're like one person is like forcing it. And I was just like, oh my god. And then like later that was, you know, also a plot point for Jadau's character. So like,
Yeah.
I also thought it was kind of interesting that, and in that scene they point this out as well, that none of the Kel should be having any sort of emotional connections. That all the Kel just need to focus on their work, basically, from the perspective of the Heptarchate, which is like, really? Like, that's asking a lot of your people.
I think it's just like furthering and completing like their dehumanization, because like they even mention like having like drugs to take that like away, and so it really emphasizes, I think, how leadership treats the Kel, which is just like disposable and like not really individuals, not people. It reminds me a little bit almost of like a hive mind, especially when you get some of these like composite things, which I didn't quite understand, which seem like hive minds of like multiple different people. And so like that, those comments, and then some of like the other attitudes, just like the most dehumanized you can get like an individual. I thought it was really interesting. And again, more comments on military.
For clarification, the composites are quite literally a hive mind.
Okay. I was a little confused. I wasn't sure if it was like a temporary thing or if it was a permanent thing. So I wasn't sure if it was like a bunch of individuals linked up together with their like a hive mind, but temporary, like linked into some kind of AI interface, or if it was a like permanent, like more surgical thing that was done to them, or alteration.
So from what I could tell, once you reach a certain rank in the Kel, as like a high general, they take you and like make you part of the composite. I think you can like leave it if you have duties elsewhere, but like Kel Command is a composite made up of high generals, as opposed to individuals.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Well, I remember when Cheris was getting orders, she referred to the image that approached her as Subcommand 2, and she talked about how she assumed that it involved two members of the Hexarchate. Is it the Hexarchate when we're reading about it? I know it was the Heptarchate for 7, and now it's the 6, the Council of 6. It's tough because there's so many words that Yunha uses in here that are like, I wouldn't use them in any other circumstance. I get why he used them here because they fit, but it is like, why though? Why you use that word? Which I think actually, isn't that something you were talking about in chat the other day, Olivia?
Yeah, I often like had to. I don't recall if it's so much of a problem in the first book, but like later on, I definitely had to stop and like look up certain words because they were like SAT study words, and then I'd find out it had like a really simple definition that he could have just used. She's like, why didn't you just say that? This isn't like a technical term that you're like using in this situation to refer to like a very specific world building thing. You can just say like gap.
It left me with the impression that he was not interested in making it easy. Like, no, like, which isn't a bad thing. Like, I think it's like an artistic choice, but like, the book isn't, I don't think it's designed to be like easy to read or like maybe even like widely accessible. I think like all those choices on the terms and the no glossary and stuff like that was like intentional. I don't know.
I think, isn't the author literally a math teacher? Like a math professor? And if my experiences of math classes are universal, they never make things easier than they could be.
Yeah, I think he's like, it's not in here, but yeah, I think like some kind of mathematics teacher or person. Yeah.
Well,
And
no.
once I didn't know that until after I'd read the book, and I was like, whoa, sacred mathematics, like all these like sort of very abstract mathy magic concepts, and that made a lot more sense.
Yeah. That actually is something I wanted to point out on stream, is that it's really fascinating. It is a story about a man essentially sequestered into a woman's body, and then ultimately the two becoming one individual, as written by a trans man.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that until, because I was looking up the author after I'd read the book, and I was like, oh, so this is one of those like right from experience situations you can very much relate. I thought that was so fascinating because I think it's really well put and really well done. Kind of you have the two aspects that ultimately make you.
Yeah, I thought it was really really interesting, and I think like there's like that whole debate on whether you can separate the art from the artist, and like here, like I think, and probably everywhere, but that's like a different conversation. But like it seems like so integral to understanding the story and like some of maybe motivations, like deeper meanings. Like once I found out that he was like really involved in math, I was like, oh, okay, that means a lot more. Like it wasn't just a cool choice to have a mathy magic system. It was like integral to like his understanding of like the world, and I thought that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed the two Cheris and Jadao like slowly becoming one person. I think that was one of my favorite aspects of the book. Oh, when she cut her gloves, that was one of my favorite scenes. It was like it just felt really raw and like symbolic, and I mean it was meant to like even like it was performative in the book, but it like hit all the notes that it was supposed to hit for the audience. Like for me, like it felt really outwardly an outward symbol of this, I don't know, other person that no one else could see, and I thought that was another really interesting aspect of it, that no one could see Jadao except in like shadow. It was just, I thought was really interesting.
The other part of that I really liked was that when Cheris would look in the mirror, she would see Jadao.
Yes, I think that is another really interesting aspect of it, and then also of like the, I think gender symbolism is really powerful there, and like I don't know, I'm cis, so I can't like, I don't want to like read too much into that, but I thought that was really interesting and felt sort of like powerful and like symbolic, and like that like disorientation of like, is she her, is she him, who does she see in the mirror? Really cool. I don't want to talk over you guys.
I will dip back into chat again unless somebody has something they want to throw in right now. I've been kind of like trying to keep up with chat while like we've been talking, so that's why I've been like over here a little bit more. Somebody pointed out earlier that they thought maybe delta form, because in math it has to do with a change, that perhaps delta forms don't have a singular shape that they take, that they are a change form servitor.
I like that as a theory.
Which I thought was a really cool theory at the very least. And then, let's see, there was some talk about like humans taking servitors for granted and not questioning that the servitors might maybe, be sticking around for their own purposes. There was a lot of talk about expansion and conquest and the religious overtones for all of that because of the calendrical system. Talking about how sacrificing those who broke formation because they weren't comfortable with the formation because the formation itself was heretical. That's really compelling. Although, I will say, for that particular situation, it seemed to me like Cheris was looking at the situation as, if we don't change formation to match better with the heretics and defend against their positioning, then we're going to lose everyone. And so the people who were resisting that, because they were like, well, we can't do heretical stuff, like she was doing what she could to try to save the group at large, I think.
Yeah.
But there is something very compelling about even having done that as they're getting back onto the cinder. Was it a cinder moth that they were getting back up to? The box moth. That's what it was. As they're getting back up to the box moth, she's like, yeah, we did heretical formations, so some of you are going to have to go back to doctrine. Sorry about it. Which is rough.
Yeah. Isn't that kind of, if I recall, what gets her noticed by Cal Command of being like, well, we want someone who is like Cal, but can also think a little bit, like isn't scared of heresy so much that they won't think out of the box enough to like be able to work with Jadal and not go crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and they also knew that since the calendrical rot had taken over the Nexus, they needed somebody who would be able to handle that, because she wound up using heretical formations a lot in those battles.
Yeah, I thought I was never quite sure what to think about that, but I think like the need for flexible thinking and creativity to succeed ran like right up against the need to conform. I thought that was really interesting, and that like conflict I think underpinned a lot of the book, and like whether are we spoiling the end? Is that what we're...
I think we have to assume in book club meetings that everyone has read the book, or else like we're going to run into a lot of trouble as far as like being able to actually talk about all of the themes.
Yeah, and then like the reveal that like democracy is like the heresy. Whoa, I did not see that coming at all. I didn't see it at all. And I think like the flexible thinking and democracy and like the authoritarian imperialism, I think it like underpinned that tension, and it was a lot about like what I guess like the governing system is going to be better.
That's sort of an inkling about the democracy thing that grew as we read the transmissions, like the letters from Vahins to Zai, I guess. Also, like, Vahins was like so exhausting to read after a while. It's so clearly just full of herself, and I was just like, you're so, like, you're funny, but like, calm down, like, stop. So I was kind of glad at the end. So I was just like, okay, yeah, neater. But you know, she was very like condescending and would make like little jokes about, oh well, what are they gonna vote on next? Like the like voting on what to name things in the new calendar, and like I think there may have been some other thing that they voted on that she referenced.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, and like the how do we say it? Liage, that group was like the philosopher faction. So like that's kind of like the immediate jump that I made, and I was like, oh no, the government is bad. The whole that's why heresy is all bad. Oh no.
All government is bad, actually.
Maybe that's the hottest take of this book.
I did think it was really interesting that when you're thinking about like, oh yeah, conformity is necessary for them to be able to do their magic power stuff, democracy probably is a big problem for them then, because you can't have like 3 or 4 like political parties that are kind of each doing their own thing. You need to have a more unified vision. And even them with their like, oh yeah, everything's very democratic and there's going to be lots of voting. It sounded like it was Doctrine that was doing all the voting. I don't think it was like average citizenry.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Doctrine was itself elected, but at the very least on the Nexus, it was Doctrine making decisions about like, this is what this hour is going to be. And then Vi's like, well, I don't know what that has to do at all with our agriculture, but whatever.
Yeah. I think I just got so frustrated with those sections. I was like, I don't care. I just want to get to the next, that I like skimmed them or like didn't pay attention. So like the whole voting thing, totally didn't even pick that up.
I mean, half of each of those letters was all about like what sweets she was going to be eating, or like the brandy that just came with documents for her.
She was so bougie. Yeah, it was. She definitely felt very much like an entitled elite person, just kind of like watching the peasants sort of squabble, and she's like, well, they can just do their little voting thing, but we're kind of in charge here. And like her communications with the Liage guy, who like the fact that they actually have a Heptarchate person, like if they are a democracy, they still have like a head of state who's sort of in charge and speaks for them. So, you know, it's something different. And like in one of the later parts of the book, they're talking about, I guess, Jadal's past, seeing all of the different heresies over all of the different periods of time that he's, you know, come out of the Black Cradle, or like that he fought during his lifetime, and they're all different, or just like different shades of the same thing. And like if they could all just like kind of get together and like overthrow that way, that was an interesting part to see as it relates to this sort of really long game. Really, really, really long game.
The longest game.
Yeah, long game. I wasn't sure what to feel about Jadal's like long game. I don't know. I think I get a little frustrated with like the long game. Like I think it made more sense here than it did like in Six of Crows, where he's just like, oh, I'm just gonna do the long game just because I want to, and my revenge must be absolute. Here, it felt like it was to a purpose, but it was still, I don't know,
much at expense to his whole existence, kind of. It's like no room for him to be a person, which, I mean, we don't really get much details on what personal life is supposed to be like for anyone. There's like the little hints of like, oh, you're not supposed to have like a relationship in this way, and then there are civilians, but we don't really know what goes on with them. There's like parks and stuff, and confectioner shops, but like, and that was on the fortress, so like, who knows what it's like for civilians in another place. I guess it's not too different because it didn't sound like it was a crazy adjustment, but that, yeah, it seemed like a very self-sacrificing long game in a almost over the top kind of way. Like, especially since it sounded like something that he had been kind of thinking about since his first year in academy, or maybe before then. Yeah. So.
I think that Jadao has always like seen himself as a gun, like a tool to be used, and like he's trying to just like figure out what direction to shoot and who to be used by, and that like goes back to like even switching out of Shuos to Cal is like trying to figure, like, he still sees himself as a weapon to be used. He's just trying to figure out someone to like what his goal is. Can you remind me what he says his goal is in the first book?
In the first book, he says that his like end goal is to bring down the Heptarcate as an organization and essentially burn the calendar to the ground.
Okay. Can you remind me what that has to do with Kujin?
Kujin is the one who offers Jadao immortality. Because Nirai Kujin is the only one that knows the math to keep people from going insane when they come out of the Black Cradle. And there's a little bit... Gosh, this feels so long ago. I read the whole book in like 2 weeks, but because it's so like densely packed, it feels like ages ago. One of the Heptarchs is talking, or I guess Hexarchs, is talking to one of the other ones when they're discussing whether or not to use Cheris. And they're talking about how they're both not really keen on Nirai Kujin, and they wish that they could figure out how to make the Black Cradle work so that they themselves could also be immortal. But they can't, and so they need him, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sorry for asking all this. I'm just trying to remember, like, what actually happened. Was Kujin the one who made the offer to, or suggested to Jadao about taking down the Hexarchate?
Yes.
That's okay.
Because he was like, join me, right? It was like, join me and we'll take it down.
Because you're going to need a mathematician to help you out, and I'm a great I'm the best mathematician. But I think
Jadao having dyscalculia made him so much more relatable to me. By the way, I just love that book.
Yeah, I think that is a phenomenal character flaw to have in a universe that math is so important.
Yeah.
My read on that situation, though, was that Jadao didn't really want to work with Kujin, but like saw it as a means to an end, so to speak, where Kujin is offering Jadao exactly what Jadao needs in order to make the kind of difference that Jadao wants to make, because Jadao knows that he can't pull this off in one lifetime.
Yeah. I thought Kujin was a pretty good villain. Like he seemed really creepy. I liked all like the black cradle. Like I don't know. I enjoyed scenes with him because there was something about him that was just like really unsettling. Strong like sociopath energy. And I don't know, I thought he made for a good villain.
Yeah.
You kind of get a bit of a sociopath read off of each of the Heptarcate.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I feel like you have to be a sociopath as like a prerequisite to become a hexakit.
Yeah, definitely.
And who was it? The Shuos, was it Mikades?
Yeah.
Was talking about, like, in the Shuos position as the Hexarchate, you typically don't live very long, and so everyone's very impressed with Mikades because he's managed to serve for as long as he has.
Yeah.
That was interesting in a society that's all about stability and imposed order, that there would be such like turnover and like risk of assassination. I thought that was like somewhat counterintuitive. I thought it didn't, not that it didn't make sense in a bad way, but it was a weird aspect of it.
I mean, I'd argue it kind of makes sense, because if that's going to be your head of cloak and dagger and subterfuge, you want them to be the absolute best at assassinations and otherwise.
And not getting assassinated.
Exactly.
Kind of the rogue sort of situation going on there.
Yeah. I guess it didn't fit with like my mental image of like bureaucracy, because I'm like, okay, like CIA-esque, and like I mostly imagine like a political actor, but like maybe they get like edged out of like office, or like their faction isn't in power anymore, but not as much literal murder. But I don't know, I thought it was interesting.
Marion pointed out that she thought of Silence of the Lambs on at least a few occasions with Jadao and Cheris.
Yeah, there were a few scenes that definitely had those vibes.
Like the one where he's going to get her to put down her Ravenstone. Oh my god.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
that was such a good scene.
It's insane.
The horror elements and like the creepy elements to this were really good. I think like I love sci-fi mixed with horror, and not that I read a lot of horror, but I thought this book did a really good job at like the psychological elements.
Yeah, I went back and reread the first chapter, and now that I wasn't like trying to figure out what all these words were, I was able to appreciate much more like how graphically he described and like visually impactful he describes the like dead and the scene of a battle, but without making it like super gross. It still has like this line of just creating horror inside of you without it being like so off-putting that you have to put it down.
Like weird fractal gore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's described in such a like clinical way that you can almost feel the level of detachment that both Cheris and Jadao have from it.
Yeah. And I think there's like a part in the middle of the battle where she's surrounded by all these dead bodies, and she notices that the flowers have bloomed underfoot in like response to the dead bodies and stuff. And I was like, oh, it's such like a good little detail of just like, that's not like a happy thing.
Some of the imagery reminded me, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Annihilation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But like some of the body horror, but like in like a twisted kind of like beautiful way, and with a lot of the organic elements, like it kept reminding me of Annihilation and how it mixed like sci-fi and psychological horror and body horror like all kind of together. Um,
there was a section in a book that I read a few months ago, called Reincarnation Blues, and it's sort of like the premise is a guy who is going through like a whole bunch of different reincarnations, and he has to reach enlightenment, but he lives a whole bunch of different lives, like in the past and in the future and on different worlds and different times. So, you know, like one life might be like 2020, like what we're living now, and then one might have been like a like near prehistoric type Neanderthalish existence, and then there are some that are in space, on like mining colonies and stuff, and there's one that sort of has elements of some sci-fi situations where there's spaceships and stuff, but it's like an oppressed people that are kind of stuck living on an island, and they have to deal with like the pollution from one of these huge like space corporations that's just like dumping pollutants, and like it messes with the weather, and so the weather is radioactive. So if they see a storm coming, like the descriptions of what like a storm cloud looks like, they say it like looks like a bloated bladder that erupts in the sky, and then like when it rains on you, like the body horror descriptions of like what happens if this rain falls on you is like it's very Annihilation-esque, and very like there were several parts in Ninefox Gambit that reminded me of that book, where it was just like the descriptions of like just kind of like whoop, everything inside is outside and outside is inside, and like the descriptions were it was also, that's a really good book, but yeah,
That sounds awful.
the book is really good, but that part of the book was very like terrifying.
No, I mean purely as an experience that sounds awful. Like not that the book was bad, just like I don't want to be in that position. That sounds horrifying.
Yeah, I would prefer for my skin to be on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I bought that book on your recommendation, and it's sitting on my to be read stack, which I've put myself on a book buying ban, and I'm not buying any more books until I get my to be read stacks down to like reasonable levels, and that's on there.
I had thought that quarantine would help me with my to be read stacks, but because we started book club, I've been reading so many new and fascinating books that my to be read stack has stayed exactly the same. I'm literally just keeping up at this point, which is better than I was doing, because before it was just like a stack of books growing and growing. All right, before we move to this coming month's book and then talking about what we're looking at maybe voting on for September, I want to talk about real quick the final scene where Cheris is consuming all of the glass shards of memories of Jadao in order to like bring the whole thing together so that she can then take on his mission. First and foremost, having like crystallized memories is such a cool concept.
Yeah, it's super cool. It like, I don't know, it was really interesting to have something so intangible made tangible, especially when the opposite is true for Jidao's like consciousness. Like he like what you're normally in a body, and like he as himself is intangible, yet now his memories have been made like tangible and consumable, which I thought was a really cool contrast. And then like the horror element and like the idea of like swallowing glass, and like so great. And like so like you have like the inherent horror element of swallowing glass, as well as like the idea that like the memories are painful, which I think really resonates with like our understanding of like Shadao and his like life. And um the idea of like becoming him is painful, and is like, I also like that it was a slow and conscious process. It wasn't just like one shard. She had to consume piece by piece him. Like, oh, you even have the cannibalism element. So cool. And like, yeah, I liked how conscious of an action it was. Like the transformation.
I particularly enjoyed, as kind of part of that horror element that we were talking about, how Cheris is looking around and seeing like the commander that took Naravor's position has just been blasted into glass, and she can tell from where he was who it is, but also she can see kind of the shape of him in the glass, but then also see memories that he had not shared with her. And kind of that moment of would he ever have if this hadn't happened, kind of thing. Like, it's what a compelling concept. Like, are you more than your experiences and your behaviors for your experiences? Because in consuming Jadao, she places herself in the scenes where he was, and the two merge.
Yeah.
Like the whole, what? I don't think I could have ever thought to write a scene like that, given an entire lifetime to write. Because it's something so, like, outside of my scope of reference.
I think the book makes the argument that you are kind of the, like, your experiences. Like, you are made up of your memories, like your experiences, like the sum total of those. And so that I read another sci-fi book recently called A Memory Called Empire, which was such an interesting contrast to Ninefox Gambit. It is a sci-fi where the culture, so the themes are also colonialism, conquest, and imperialism, but told from the perspective of a diplomat, like an ambassador of a small mining station that is sent to the capital planet of the big of the empire to try and advocate for her like small mining station. And because they're a small mining station, they developed this technology that it's like an implant that basically stores your consciousness, and then when you die, that's taken out and implanted into the next person, so they have all of those past experiences and nothing is wasted. And then the two minds sort of merge as one, and you get their like the benefit of past generations. I thought that was such an interesting contrast to, and it's like a profound cultural and almost religious experience. And I thought it was a really interesting contrast to this one, which seems a little bit like so much more like visceral and horror-y and violent almost, but not really, but like kind of. And it was very interesting to like two different approaches to the concept of like shared consciousness and hive mind and stuff and personhood. Memory Called Empire is really good.
I mean, maybe that needs to be on the list. I don't know. Yeah, that whole sequence was just so amazing with everything that's going on, and then to have, you know, this character that we've been kind of hearing from throughout a big chunk of the book become a physical person in the space, and you're like, oh, you know that Cheris Jadao is not in a good spot right now between being blasted to pieces and then also like having just gone through this very difficult, very like painful process, and is now like put in danger. What a way to close a book.
I thought it ended just super strong. That was definitely, I think it was my favorite scene from the book. I loved the Ravenstone like scene too. I thought the scenes where both Cheris and Jadao, like we get a lot of them interacting, were my favorites, I think.
Will you guys read the rest of it?
I think I probably will like continue through the series just because this finished so strong that I feel like if this is where Yoon-Ha Lee was at versus where the book started, then the next book is just going to be that much better then.
I wanted to throw out a random thing that I think is too pointed to actually be random. The first chapter where we, you know, see Cheris and Jadao being the same person after he like consumes his memories is chapter 23, and 23 is her name, like that number, like when you're talking about name meanings. Because I got to chapter 23 and I was like, oh, 23, like her name. And then I was like, oh, is this the last chapter of the book? And it's not the last chapter, it's the second to last chapter, but it's also the first chapter where she is both.
That makes you
Jadao.
That makes you wonder if that was just like really like convenient happenstance,
I know. Or is it because the numbers?
Are you going to be a numerologist, Sharon? No, I love it.
The author is.
That's so cool. I would have never noticed.
I did not catch that at all. So I'm so glad that Sharon, you did, so that we all know, because that's so cool.
Yeah, I haven't like looked it up anywhere or not, so there might be. Maybe they asked the author at some point, like, did you do that on purpose? And maybe they were like, no. Or maybe they did. I don't know. But
I mean, it is.
I just finished it this morning, so
it is theoretically possible, I guess, that Yoon-Ha Lee waited until the book was pretty much finished and then went back to that section where Cheris is talking about what her name means. And is like, and here's where we put in the number for the chapter where...
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm certain I'll finish the series, but I'm very bad at reading series, and I don't know why. I find it really hard to like finish a series, so I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually. But
yeah.
Did you enjoy it? Did you feel like it had a good culmination?
Same with not being able to finish series. Yeah, I really liked the second and the third ones a lot more than the first. Like they had much stronger characters that I felt like I had like strong attachments to. and it was actually like enjoyable to read. Like I don't think the first book was particularly enjoyable, but the characters in like the second and the third book are actually like really interesting to get into, and they like make jokes, and there's just a lot of like little bits that are very fun to get into. And then like expanding out the perspective to a lot more characters that are reoccurring, and not just like die in the next chapter.
Interesting. Is the tone fairly similar between the first and the other two?
The tone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it sticks with the themes that it introduces in the first book. I think it felt a lot different and easier to read, possibly because I had like already gone through and learned all the terminology. And they do a lot better job. They actually like explain a lot of the terminology they use in the first book. And I'm just kind of like, why couldn't you have explained that earlier? Like, thank you for giving me this in-depth like exposition about how this works, but I wish you had told me this before like I was 30 chapters in. But yeah, the things I liked from the first book like were definitely stronger in the next two.
Awesome. Okay, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like a pretty strong recommendation.
Yeah, if any of you guys finish it, I would love to hear opinions about like the ending and other things in it.
Olivia, you said you're on the Discord, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's your like Discord?
Ollie.
Ollie? Okay.
I've got like a weird little knockoff Rayquaza icon.
Cool.
So chat talked about there's been some discussion about probably would like be interested in finishing the series out, but would be hesitant to jump into another Yunhali series based on the difficulties of jumping into this one. And I will point out, for the benefit of anyone who doesn't already know, isn't this Yunhali's first novel that he published?
I'm not sure.
Because the author quote right on the front of the book is all about like Yunhali breaks out in a like really amazing way, and
has arrived in spectacular fashion.
Yeah, and to me that reads a lot like this is Yunhali's first novel, and manages to win a Hugo Award. Or rather, be nominated for a Hugo Award. Apologies. But that's like, just to get the nomination off of your first novel would be kind of amazing, honestly. And so if this is novel number 1 for Yunhali, I would be intrigued by what other books they might have published, just because there's so much you can learn from having done it that you might not know going right out the gate.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that Glaucon points out that he wonders if the author added a lot of definition in book 2 after some of the critiques, like we have said.
Yeah.
I would bet.
Yeah, first books are always interesting. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but you read a book that like got a lot of buzz, or you just came across it by an author and you're like, I want to read everything this author's ever written. And then you go back to some of their early books and you're like, whoa, this is different.
Oh yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
He has a young adult book that he just published last year, which I am very interested about how he would write young adult. But yeah, Ninefox Gambit is his first series.
Yeah, I don't
Okay,
know.
yeah.
if I mentioned it when we were just chatting before, or if it was when we were live, but I have a copy of his new book, which I think will be a series that's coming out in like August, maybe. I'll have to look at it. Called and it's called Phoenix Extravagant, and it's I think more sort of fantasy, steampunk, or what's being called silk punk, which is like a non-Western take on steampunk kind of genre, and it's got dragons, like I think like a mechanized or some kind of like hybrid of magic and robotic dragons in it. So I'm looking forward to reading that one.
Okay,
It's been sitting on my TBR shelf for a while.
That does sound really cool.
Yeah. The cover's beautiful. It's got this like red like Asian dragon type thing on it.
Glockon's asking if you would define it as silk punk, which is kind of like steampunk but more like Asian influence.
Yeah. If I would define this as,
No, the book that you were just talking about.
I think it does fall into that category. I haven't read it yet, but from the description, it does. I've read a couple in that genre. What comes to mind is a book I read called The Black Tides of Heaven, which is like it's a series of novellas, and they're really interesting and weird. I've only read the first one, but I have the second one, which I haven't read yet. I'm trying to get through my stack. And it's got like magic driven automaton, and it's got dinosaurs, and it's got like really cool magic system, and again I think themes of imperialism, which seems to be, I mean, it's a pretty common theme in steampunk with sort of the Victorian Empire, and I think the parallels in silk punk and some of like a sci-fi and fantasy coming out of Asia and like written by Asian authors is really interesting. I think probably because China is such like a big looming presence, and the sort of political situation with the South China Sea and Hong Kong, and the strong cultural presence is influencing some really interesting sci-fi and fantasy. So that's my take on imperialist themes in silk punk.
That's the content I'm here for.
I'll back up that recommendation on the Black Tides of, what was it, Heaven?
Yeah.
I went through those and I enjoyed the first two in it.
Yeah. Have you read the rest of them?
I know, so I read the two that are from the perspective of the siblings. And I haven't read the ones after that. They were good, but to be honest, like I said before, I have difficulty getting through series if there's no if the book doesn't fall right into the next one. So I had a little bit of difficulty getting into the next ones.
No, I'm the same way.
All right. I think let's take a minute to talk about this coming month's book, which is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. And this was one you recommended, right, Lauren?
It is. It's one of my favorites from last year or the year before.
So what are we getting ourselves into here? What is the basic, like, not like the plot, but like what is the theme of the book?
Ooh. Olivia, did you say you had read this too?
I read the first 1/4 of it, and it I was not in the right headspace to handle it, so I put it down.
So it is relatively heavy. It's got some really interesting themes of like, so the magic system's really interesting. It has themes of like authority and both conforming and resisting authority figures, and also sort of overarching things of like themes of like minority rights, racism, and some really interesting aspects because the magic users are a minority and seen as like very dangerous and to be either controlled or killed. And so you follow the main character as she tries to like navigate living in that system. It starts with the end of the world, which is very fun. So it's also got some like cool dystopian elements but it's a world where the apocalypse has happened several times before because
Wow.
yeah,
Is that the 5th season?
yeah,
Brings up fall winter apocalypse.
yeah, no joke. It's the like the world is unstable, and so the magic users are I don't
It's if you're feeling like you're skirting into spoiler territory, you're fine.
I'm gonna zip it.
I just wanted to get like a basic idea of what we should like brace ourselves for when we go to pick this up.
Right. Content warning wise, all of them. It's 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 fairly heavy. It doesn't feel as to me. It didn't feel as dense and difficult to get through terminology wise as this one, though it does have a decent amount of like fantasy terminology and magic system. But I didn't feel super bogged down in that aspect. I think it can be a little bit heavy. I know that's one of the I actually suggested starting with this book, but because we were earlier in quarantine and it opens with the end of the world,
Yeah.
it's a little too on the nose. And
Starting off with Gideon the Ninth was
that was a good one.
Oh, such a good book.
I think this will be a little bit heavier than either it will be heavier than Gideon the Ninth or Six of Crows, but I think the payout is worth it because it really delivers on the feels. So,
Well, and I've found that like heavier stuff like this is a little easier to digest when you've got other people to kind of share that with.
Yeah. Definitely. I know that's like when I read the 5th season, that's immediately what I wanted to do was like, oh, I went through this. I have to talk to somebody about it. And like,
I told you to get that book, Lauren. I don't know anybody else who's read it.
what book?
Reincarnation Blues.
Yes. So I'm like super excited to talk to you guys about it. It's written in a really interesting writing style that I think has put some people off, but you get really used to it. I am not an English person at all, totally ignorant. I like reading, but I did not study it very much, and so it's like second person or something like that.
Hmm.
You don't see like ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm excited. I'm fully ready to be in chat on a regular basis. Like, someone console me. This is really difficult.
I love the processing in real time on chat. It's wonderful.
Yeah. That's been one of my favorite parts of book club is popping into chat and seeing just walls of spoiler text. I struggled a little bit with that on Ninefox Gambit because I first picked it up and I read like 1.5 chapters and I was like, cannot with this right now. And part of the issue is that I'd been reading Crooked Kingdom, which is the second book in the Six of Crows series, and adoring that. And so of course it's like, well, I need to read the book club book, so I'm putting this aside for now. I still haven't finished. And reading the first like chapter and a half of Ninefox, I was like, I don't know, but there's a book that I'm really adoring that's right over there. I don't want to slog.
Yep.
It was such a relief when like things started picking up and everything started to make more sense. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was a project.
It was, yeah, just like I had to focus in and make it happen. But I'm glad I did because it's really good. So I don't expect this to be a slog, but I am excited for the like walls of spoiler text in 5th season where everybody's like, oh my god, you guys, I need to talk about what just happened.
I'm excited to read it along with you because I think for a couple of the other books, I've read them like maybe a month before everyone else did. But this one I'm going to start rereading kind of along with you guys because it's been so long and I'm excited.
Fantastic. All right. So that's next month's book, which I think probably Alex will be in chat soon to confirm with everybody that they want a copy. I know we usually get these things done a little bit earlier, but like life is chaos right now. So like we're gonna cut Alex some slack. But if you're local and you need a copy, I know Alpha Comics and Games can order it. We have confirmed that. So it's just a matter of who wants it. If you're on the Discord already, then go ahead and pop into the Entertainment Media channel and be like, hey, at Lexi Sunshine, because that is her Discord handle. I too would like this book to be accessible to me via your store. And if you're not already on the Discord channel, I am going to post a link in there because you totally should be, so that you can join in the conversations, not just when we're having book club, but in between as well. Let me grab a code. So who has suggestions for books for our September book club?
Are you asking Discord or are you asking us?
Well, I'm asking you guys first, but also like folks in chat, if you've got suggestions, let's hear them. Because I want to like broaden our scope a little bit beyond just the presenters.
Definitely.
I have a couple recommendations. For like sci-fi, I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet recently. And it's a lot softer, more optimistic sci-fi. And I really, really enjoyed it. And then in terms of fantasy, I also read, I think it was called The Unbroken Name or The Unspoken Name, which is another recent book that I like couldn't read anything else afterwards for like a week because I just had to like go back and reread it.
Is that the one with that's the one with necromancy, right?
The Unspoken Name.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yes, it is.
And the main character is like a orc, like.
Yeah, orc.
Yes. Remember when I was like lesbian necromancy books? That's another one.
Yep.
That sounds familiar, and maybe it's because it was one that Lauren had mentioned.
Yeah, I was really into it. I made my girlfriend read it, and we just like talked about it for a few days afterwards. It was like if you were into the Earthsea series, as I was as a small child, and read Tombs of Atuan, and were like, I want to know more. Actually, like what happens afterwards. It really scratched that itch that I didn't know that I needed.
Yeah,
Those both sound like.
and they're both like super queer and great books.
Yeah. Oh yes, like that goes without saying. I would never recommend a book that had straight people in it.
All right.
Nope. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that Glockon suggested Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson because it's a fun one, basically the opposite end of the tonal spectrum from Ninefox Gambit.
I'm here for fun goofy reads to shake it up because fifth season will also be a little bit heavy, and so it might be nice to have like a fun one. I think Small Angry Planet is also like, or The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is also like a relatively fun one. Like
Warbreaker is also free, if I recall, which I don't think he mentioned. It's a free novel that Brandon Sanderson put up on his website, or at least it was when I read it.
Oh, neat.
I have opinions on it, but it is good.
Glockon does, in fact, confirm that it is free on his website. What did you have for us, Lauren? Anything? It's okay if you don't.
I didn't come prepared for one, though. If you give me like 1 second, I'll look at my recent read shelf. So Sharon, can we skip to you, and I'll be right back.
Yeah. I also don't have any prepared recommendations. Other than like maybe Reincarnation Blues is good. It's I guess more sci-fi. It's like sci-fi and reincarnation sort of, in that it's, it shows scenes from the future, after space travel and that sort of thing. Yeah, been trying to get everybody to read that for a long time. So that's my one recommendation.
I'll put it on the list, absolutely. I am going to at some point I'm going to go back to things I'd suggested before to see if we want to dive back in that direction. But for this particular meeting, I was thinking it might be cool because I've heard so many good things about it. I've had it recommended so many times, and I really liked the film adaptation. It might be cool to go back and check out Cloud Atlas.
I have never seen the movie, but I've heard good things.
I really enjoyed the film to the point where it's one of my favorites. But the book I've heard is so much even better than the film that it's like, well, I should probably read that at some point. Because if it's that good and I liked the movie that much, like, let's do this.
Yeah. Okay. I looked through some of my books and I pulled out 3, but I think I'm going to go with This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's a novella, so like maybe that disqualifies it. I read it in like one sitting, but it's really, really good. It's about 2 rival agents in a time war slowly falling in love. and like all through like as they're like fighting each other, um, through all of like time and space, uh, they like well, it's really good.
Lauren, read Reincarnation Blues. He falls in love with the Grim Reaper.
So I think this is like in my top, like my top 5 books I've read this year, and it's just really good. My heart is ice, and it made me cry.
Oh my gosh.
I
All right.
have 3 weeks left on my Libby waiting list for that book.
I mean, that would be really good timing because we're talking about, since the 5th season is our next upcoming book, we're talking about book club after next. So that'd be almost perfect for timing. All right. So I've got 7 really good suggestions here. Let me see. I'm gonna only take 1 suggestion per meeting from our lovely audience. I'm seeing a couple of like, oh, we could do this. We could also do this. I'm gonna go with whatever you said first, just so that I don't have a 20 book list that everybody has to vote on which one they want. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Okay, it doesn't look like I've missed anyone. Of course, if you've got a suggestion, I'm probably not going to put the poll up tonight, so you can message it in the Entertainment Media channel on the Discord. Yeah, I'm honestly like I could see This Is How You Lose the Time War winning, just so that we've all got a little more time to crush down through our individual to be read lists. But I'm excited to see how the 7 shape up against each other, because it's going to be really good.
If you wanted to do a novella one month, there's a lot of good novellas out there too. I mean, maybe there would be like less discussion. That's one of the reasons like I hesitated a little bit, because it's really, really good, but there's like less to discuss, but it might be more accessible to more people because it's not like super thick. So I don't know. But if you wanted to do a novella month, let me know. Novellas are like my favorite.
No, Lost Limey, I did in fact catch your suggestion of Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Cowell. I'm intrigued, so I'll be looking that up to see what it's about, and then we can do kind of like a little blurb on each of them, and then we'll have our poll on Facebook. And so I'll probably do it the same way I did it before, where I just do like reactions, and you just react to the post, and whatever you react is the winner, and that's what we read. Thank you all so much for coming out and joining us. Olivia, do you have anything you'd like to plug to our lovely audience?
I do a podcast called Cast About RPG, and we will be posting our final episode sometime this month. If anyone wants to get caught up in time for that.
Are you all going on hiatus for a bit, or are you jumping into something else, or is this going to be like the last episode?
It will be the last episode. We will not be continuing under the Cast About name, and I need some time off to refill the creative well.
That's totally fair, and I completely understand. I figured I would just check to be sure. Lauren, I know what you want to plug. Please plug in.
I have a Instagram at Feminist Reading List, where I read and review and talk about my favorite books that I'm reading right now. It's mostly sci-fi, fantasy, and romance, with sort of a focus on like women and queer voices. So if you want to know about those genres, you can follow me.
Fantastic. Sharon, do you have anything you want to plug?
Goblins and Growlers. Go Josh. Take it away.
I mean, we will be a D&D event company again at some point, hopefully. But for now, we're doing like live streams. We're doing online stuff for digital conventions. We've done a couple of like digital panels, which has been a really interesting experience. There is, of course, always the podcast Quid Pro Roll. It's all about like bringing dragons, specifically metallic dragons, back to a world where chromatic dragons have taken full control. If you have enjoyed hanging out with a bunch of nerds and talking about book stuff, you can catch us again here next month. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but I can pull it up relatively quickly. The other thing I would mention is that Brandon's going to be on tomorrow for streaming. We've cut our gaming streams down to once a week on Wednesdays, 6:30 to 8:30. Brandon typically plays old school RPGs, but he has been dipping into a little bit of Don't Starve lately. So if that sounds like your jam, then definitely check that out. Next month's book club stream is not on the calendar.
It's not on the calendar. Do we want it on the 11th or the 25th?
Well, let's see. This is the second. I think the second Tuesday. Let's stick with that. So it'll be the 11th.
Going on the calendar now.
Perfect. So next month, the 11th, 7 p.m. I know that we've been marking it as 7 to 8 and then running until 9. I think it's just going to vary depending on how much we actually have to say about the book, which tonight we had a lot to say about the book. So much to say about the book. For anybody who decided to pick up the Six of Crows sequel, Crooked Kingdom, I'll be in chat here shortly, like in the next week or so, to discuss the ending of that and things like that. And isn't the Gideon the Ninth sequel, Harrowhark the Ninth, coming out next month?
It's coming out next month. I'm so excited. It's the book I'm breaking my book buying ban for.
Well, maybe you can shrink your to be read list a little bit in that time, so that you're not like breaking your vow to yourself. You're just kind of like playing inside the space.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you all for helping me host this. It is a huge thing to have everyone's opinions and thoughts, and I love talking about books with everybody. So always very exciting. And next month we will be guest spotting another one of our lovely community members. Thank you so much, Olivia, for joining us this month.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. And I'm excited to hear more thoughts on books in chat. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.